So Martin, you have a very interesting distinction on this podcast because you are actually the first podcast guest I have had on who I actually did not know before reaching out to you. I had never heard of you, and how I came into learning about you was we had interviewed Tommy Emmanuel recently, and obviously Tommy Emmanuel, one of the greatest to ever play the guitar, ever touch it, and he mentioned you about 10 different times in the podcast. And as soon as I realized that, that name kept appearing again and again and again, I knew I had to get you on the podcast. And I'm so thankful I did because I've gotten to deep dive into so much of your stuff, so much of your story, so much of your music. And I'm really excited to get the chance to talk to you. And one of the things that's come up a lot within your story is mentorship. And you have so many incredible mentors in your life, and we can go through and list all of them. But I have a few questions about mentorship, and especially the way that relates to musicians. And so, what I kind of want to know is what makes a good mentor? What are the kind of things a musician can learn from a mentor that is different than taking lessons from an instructor, at their local music school or music store? And then, how does one find a mentor?
Well, first of all, I mean, a mentor has got to have a vast amount of experience. Has got to have been around for quite a long time. And what makes a good mentor is somebody that has a generosity that they're they're very willing and generous in giving information, whatever the if you want to say the student needs to know, they will generously give that information. And I was very fortunate that my first mentor was my father, who was a jazz bass player, and so that was the very beginning for me. That he played all these records. I grew up with the music of Django Reinhardt, first of all. Um, and then later on, I had mentors. Stefan Grappelli, of course, was a great mentor. Barney Kessel was a wonderful mentor for me as well. And one of the things they all had in common was actually they never actually sat down and taught me anything. It's almost just actually being around a mentor, being around somebody that has incredible life experience, has done amazing things in the field of music. It's almost like it comes out of the pores of their skin. And when I toured with Stefan Grappelli for 11 years, and I knew him for over 20 years, and we would talk about lots of different things. We rarely spoke about music, but just being around him and observing him, and getting to know him, know the way his mind worked, how he approached music, how he approached performing, which was very interesting for me because I'd worked with a lot of jazz musicians and some very well-known jazz musicians before Stefan. But he was the first jazz musician I met that was very conscious of communication, of communicating the music with the audience. Whereas a lot of jazz musicians I worked with before, it's kind of, okay, this is what I do. Take it, you either like it or you don't. I don't care. It was more that kind of vibe. With Stefan, it was communication. So from him, I learned a lot about communication because really I think of what I do as storytelling. Really, it's we're when I sit on stage, if I'm playing solo or with a group, is that I'm it's not just I'm playing a bunch of tunes. I'm taking the listener through an experience of emotions. As far as finding a mentor, that is, I was very fortunate. It's kind of time and place. And I got into music first of all when I was still at school in the 60s, and then I became a professional musician around early 70s. And so I was just around a lot of people, and I just it's a bit like when you meet a lot of people, especially when you're young, and how you choose your friends. You know, you could. sometimes we make mistakes with friends that we choose that maybe are not a good choice, and sometimes you make friends with somebody who just has something that really inspires you and something that you never forget. So it's also a kind of a friendship. It's not just a kind of mentor apprentice kind of thing, but just being around somebody and feeling, just getting a feel of how they've lived their lives, and if they've lived you know a, a long and life lot of experience, that just kind of rubs off on you. And it's not a matter of like having lessons, as you said. What's the difference between like the teaching experience? Yeah, you can go to. I never went to anybody for guitar lessons, for instance, but one of my biggest mentors, guitar players, was a guitarist called Ike Isaacs, and he just being around him and sitting in his living room and just playing a couple of guitars and just playing, I just learned so much. But I never actually had a formal lesson. I never had a formal lesson with anybody, but I just absorbed, just soaked everything up. And you mentioned Tommy Emmanuel. Tommy Emmanuel, Tommy's a sponge. He just, you play something once and Tommy just absorbs it. And he's got that thing of, for Tommy, he's a mentor for many, but he will tell you himself that he has many mentors himself, and continues to have, actually, as we all do.
So that's awesome. I think there's some really interesting places we can go here. So have you ever had any I guess bad mentors so you could compare these good mentors to? Has there ever been like people who you thought you looked up to, but they were actually like had terrible advice when it came to music?
Yes, yeah. I mean, yeah,
You don't need
yeah,
to name
yeah.
them now. I'm not trying to cause any drama or anything, but maybe,
No, and
compare
I'm
and
just trying to
contrast.
think. I'm just trying to think. I don't think you would even know who any of them were, but yeah, there were. I used to get a lot of advice when you're younger. You get a lot of older musicians will tell you you should do this, you should do that, and you get a little confused. It's very easy to get confused with that. One of the things for me was, because I started to play very young. I became professional when I was very young. I also got married when I was very young. I was only 19, and I became a dad when I was 20. So I had a young family to support. Incidentally, I'm still married to the same woman, which is quite amazing. But so I had this family to support. So even though I just only really wanted to play jazz, and I was really a jazz player, I had to put food on the table. So I used to do, I did the things playing at weddings and all kinds of things like that with bands. And I really enjoyed it, actually. I got a lot of pleasure out of doing it and making a good job of doing that. But it wasn't really what I was good at, because I was really just a jazz musician. I wasn't good at playing lots of different styles of guitar. I couldn't really play, and I couldn't play rock. I couldn't play country music. I could do a kind of okay impression of it if I was somewhere and they wanted something like that, but it wasn't really what I could do. And a lot of the older musicians that I knew, who were also mentors, actually gave me advice that was very well-meaning advice. But a lot of them said, you play really well, and we'll get on with you, and you could have a really good future as a studio musician. Now the problem was, well, two problems. One is that I couldn't play in lots of different styles, which you need to be able to do when you're a studio guitar player. The other thing is I couldn't read music, let alone sight read music. So they say, if you just learn to read music, you could be a studio player. Having the responsibility of having a family and seeing the studio musicians that I knew and how well they were doing and how they lived a far better lifestyle than I did, had nicer houses and a nicer car when I was riding around in a wreck. It was very tempting, from the point of view of supporting my family. But I kind of stuck with what I did. And I often think to myself, I look back at it now, and the hindsight is a wonderful thing. But I look back at it now and I think what was actually a wonderful thing for me, not for everybody, was a wonderful thing was that I was purely a jazz musician. I couldn't play in lots of different styles, and I couldn't sight read. A lot of these things would have been a handicap, but actually for me, it meant that I followed a path, and I was forced to follow this path because it's very easy to get sidetracked, not just in as a musician, but generally in life, because we all have responsibilities in life, one way or another, and we just go, oh well, I better try and do this. I see it a lot of the time. A lot of younger people that I know that are constantly having to kind of reinvent themselves in what they do. I'm not talking about in music, but just generally people I know. I've got relatives and nieces and nephews that every so often have to kind of reinvent themselves to kind of, and then they get back on some kind of track that they've been trying to follow. And I guess I was just maybe I just dumb. I just went all the way down the line and just plowed through even during the very difficult times. I was very fortunate to have a wife that was very understanding about that, because also I was the breadwinner. It wasn't like my wife wasn't a breadwinner, so it was all down to me. So the practicalities of it. We can talk about music and being a musician. We can get very ethereal about it being the I'm an artist and all this kind of thing. But we all live in the same world. We all have to survive. We all have to pay bills, keep a roof over our heads, and it's finding that path that you can follow where you can actually stay true to yourself, but at the same time not end up living in a cardboard box somewhere. Yeah, my life is quite unusual, I guess, and also you got to remember that it was a different time as well. That's something else. I sometimes get asked advice about from younger players about a musical career, and I always say that um, I'm not the person to give advice to somebody about starting out, because when I started out, that was a different world. That world actually doesn't exist anymore. So I can't say, well, I did this and I did that. I played in the band on the QE2 going across the Atlantic to New York backwards and forwards. Yeah, I think that probably still does carry, still does happen. But a lot of the other work that I did um, doesn't happen anymore, and there are different kinds of opportunities. It's not that there aren't any opportunities anymore, not at all. I think there's many opportunities, but they're just different. And I I embrace change. I like change. I like the fact that you know I'm not living in that past, that world before. The fact that you and I are sitting here talking and involving other people in our conversation too is a wonderful thing that would have been unthinkable when I started. So I'm not one of these guys. Oh, the good old days.